Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Tool Time with Professor Levy. Today we're going to be discussing fasteners, dust collection, the air compressor, and safety data sheets. Welcome to the area of the shop where we store all of our hardware and fasteners. This is a cart that we're currently in the process of assembling. It stores all of our hardware, fasteners, and a lot of the tools that we commonly use to drive our fasteners with. I have our rigging cabinet divided up into a few sections. Up here on the top right hand side of the rigging cabinet, which will eventually be behind doors, are where we store our cheese burrs. Cheese burrs come in a couple of different varieties. These are flexible ones, but they do have rigid ones that are at a 90-degree angle to each other. Cheese burrs are used for securing sections of pipe together. Over here, we have door handles and some butterfly anchors. This is a butterfly anchor. When you drive the machine screw through the little clip, you can insert it through a hole into a wall that doesn't have any structure behind it to secure it to, and by doing this, you can fasten to that wall. In this drawer here, we have an assortment of things. In here, we have a lot of cabinet handles that we use for like kitchen cabinets and things like that. In here, we have some of our larger drill bits, some Sawzall blades, an assortment of fender washers and flat washers, and back here some conduit clips. Conduit clips are what would be used to secure a pipe to a wall. This drawer is currently in assembly and hasn't been assigned any items to be stored in it yet. Below it, we have some machine screws. Machine screws have a flat Phillips head on their top, but no point, so they're still a screw, not a bolt. Machine screws are what we use to secure casters to wagons. Behind our machine screws here, we have an assortment of door hinges. Not just door hinges, gate hinges, cabinet hinges, magnetic clasps for cabinets. Here are some more door hinges. To the left of our hinge storage, we have this drawer full of different kinds of bolts and machine screws. In this drawer here are more machine screws, but here we have different sizes of hex bolts. In here we have nut storage. We have an assortment of regular hex nuts and lock nuts in here. Up in here we have a few odds and ends that are a little bit interesting. This is curtain track hardware. This would ride in Unistrut, which we will get into in a different video here, but it's for curtain track. These ride along in the track, and here is where we hang our curtain from. We also have clamshells that are what we use to hang the Unistrut from our pipe. This is a clamshell. It separates, goes around the pipe, and then we can clamp it in place. This side of our rigging and hardware cabinet stores a lot of our rigging supplies. The black spool in here is what we call tie line. It is a thin black cord that we use to secure curtains and other odds and ends around the theater. Over here we have some more bolts and things, and most importantly, we have aircraft cable. Aircraft cable is like rope made from wire. In this drawer, we have all of our supplies for being able to rig scenery to fly. On the left-hand side here, we have turnbuckles. A turnbuckle is two counter-threaded eyes that are able to turn in opposite directions to each other. This helps us with leveling scenery. These are wire rope clips. Wire rope clips are used to secure aircraft cable. A thimble is used to relieve the pressure on the end of the aircraft cable when you use the wire rope clips. It makes sure that the radius isn't too tight for the aircraft cable to kink and therefore lose its integrity. Behind the thimbles, we have keepers. Keepers get bolted and screwed to a flat or a piece of scenery in order to keep the scenery level and the aircraft cable tight to the piece of scenery. Shackles are what we use to attach the scenery to the pipe. The aircraft cable gets attached to the pipe with chain, and then we use a shackle to secure the aircraft cable to the chain. These shackles aren't ones that I like to use. I prefer, not that one. I prefer these shackles. These shackles are made by a company named J.R. Clancy. They are rated and stamped with an identifying label so that they can be traced back to the manufacturer. The red case inside of our rigging cart is where all of our box wrenches and sockets live. The top section of this red box of wrenches is where all the box wrenches get stored. Box wrenches, or open-ended wrenches, are used obviously for tightening down on bolts. Where they come in handy is they're able to get into different spaces because of one end being open. The other end is able to wrap around the bolt and allows you to continuously turn the wrench. Underneath the top, these red flaps open. And one on the other side. What that allows access to are these 3 drawers. Inside of these 3 drawers are where our socket wrenches and sockets live. We have both metric and imperial sockets and wrenches here, and different sized socket wrenches. A socket wrench is used for the ratcheting motion that allows you to expend less effort in order to tighten a bolt. The last section of this rigging cart is the bottom section. This is where all of our different fasteners live. Screws, nails, staples, and also our adhesives and ratchet straps. Gathered on the table here, we have some of what are the most commonly used fasteners in the scene shop here, and the pieces of equipment the drivers used for making them work. On the left-hand side is the Phillips head screws. This is the driver for a Phillips head screw. It's black because that delineates that it is rated to be used in an impact driver. We have a 3-inch Phillips head screw, and we have an 1 5/8" Phillips head screw. I use the 3-inch screws for securing 2x4 together. We use this mostly when we are building platforms, legging platforms, or securing platforms to each other or the floor. On the head of the Phillips head screw, you see a cross. This is the Phillips head. This is where the driver connects securely into the screw. Inch and 5/8 screws have the same cross that is on the 3-inch screw. I use inch and 5/8 screws mostly to build flats or connect 1x together. The inch and 5/8 screw is a number 6 screw, so it is much skinnier than the 3-inch screw, which is a number 10. The reason for this is that the 3-inch screws that get used most commonly on 2x4 need to be a lot stronger than the drywall screws, the number 6 screw that gets used on 1x and doesn't support as intense a load. Here, I have a screw that has these little wings in the middle of it. These are cutting wings. This screw has a star drive that is different to the Phillips head. It uses this bit over here. There are more points of contact with the star drive bit than there are with the Phillips head bit, so you're able to get more torque on these screws. These screws, because of their cutting head, are able to be driven through wood and into steel. In my shop, we primarily use Phillips head as the method of driving our screws. My reason for doing this is that I want to train the students to be able to use a Phillips head screwdriver in an impact driver, which is much harder to do than using the star drive or the other drive option, which is a square drive. Because of this, I try to keep only Phillips head screws in the scene shop. The reason for this is it's frustrating when too many different kinds of drive options get used building a show, and when you're taking it apart or trying to change something, you have to constantly search for the right kind of driver to drive the screws. The next kind of screw that I'm going to talk about looks like a bolt. This is a machine screw. It's still a screw because it has the Phillips head drive on the top. It's threaded. The pattern of threads on these machine screws and most bolts that I use in this shop is 10-20. Machine screws I use because they have a really low profile head. You can get them in an even flatter version, and I use them primarily to connect casters to caster plates. People call them lag bolts, but again, because it has a tip to it, this is actually a lag screw. Lag screws get used when you are trying to connect something to a piece of scenery or a place that you are unable to access the other side to put a nut. We use these a lot to connect things and secure to the floor. The next kind of bolt is a hex bolt. We use a lot of hex bolts here. You can use a hex bolt to connect flats together. You can use hex bolts to connect platforms together. This is a 5/16 inch hex bolt. It is also has another measurement. It is a 2 3/4 inch long hex bolt. Hex bolts and all bolts come in many different sizes. As I just said, this is 5/16 by 2 3/4. The common sizes that we use for hex bolts are 1/4 inch diameter, 5/16 inch diameter, 1/2 inch diameter would be about as big as we ever go. Next to our hex bolt is a U-bolt. U-bolts are really useful for being able to connect, say, lumber to something that is circular, like a pipe. We don't use them very often, but they do come in handy when we need them. Down below, we have our nuts and washers section. We have a variety of washers and nuts that we use. We use them for different reasons. They have very specific applications. This is a flat washer. Flat washers are used with machine screws or hex bolts when we aren't concerned about the nut of the bolt wanting to come loose. Next to the flat washer, we have a fender washer. A fender washer is a fairly wide washer that has a very narrow hole in the middle of it. This is very useful for being able to secure a screw to a piece of lumber. The reason that we use washers in general is to expand and increase the area of load that is being applied from the screw or from the bolt. The washer, with its increased area compared to the bolt or the screw, allows for more torque and pressure to be applied to the piece of scenery or lumber. We use fender washers most often to secure something temporarily to the floor and increase the pressure. Next to the fender washer and screw now, we have this split lock washer. This enables us to use a flat washer, but it means that you have to use a wrench to be able to loosen the nut. This is just a regular flat hex nut that we would use in conjunction with the lock nut. Next to the flat nut, we have our nylon locking nut, or nylock. In the center of the nut, you can see there is a nylon ring. This ring, when you tighten it over a bolt or a machine screw like I am now, only allows you to go so far. From this point on, I can't spin it too much. It gets really tight. At this point, I would have to use a box wrench or a socket to tighten it anymore. The reason for the split washers and the nylocks is to be able to maintain control over the tightness of your nut. The reason that this is a concern comes primarily when we're using bolts or machine screws on scenery that moves or is flown overhead, where we're concerned that with the constant movement over time, the nut might loosen. So the nylock and the split washer allow us to have a much greater degree of certainty in the hold of the nut. The next topic that I want to cover in this video is dust collection. Dust collection is the method of removal of sawdust by vacuum. We have our dust collection run from the machine on the left-hand side of the screen, the dust collector. It goes via the two PVC pipes that you can see on the floor. One goes to our table saw, the other runs to our chop saw. The table saw has two ports at which dust collection enters it. This one on top that enters through the back of the blade. This sucks out most of the sawdust. And then we have our other port that comes in through the bottom. On top is the hose that runs up to the top of the table saw. We have gates. Our dust collector has gates on each of the PVC pipes that run to it. These gates open and close, obviously. The reason for the gates on our dust collector are to be able to shut off or open airflow to one or the other of the saws. I am able to have both of our gates open, or I can close one and only have the gate that runs to the chop saw currently open. The reason for doing this is that by closing one of the gates when that saw is not in use, increases the suction that is being sent to the saw that is being used. The sawdust then enters into the dust collector and is shot down into the bag. One of the really great features about our dust collector is this mesh grate, and inside of which is a HEPA filter. This filter allows air to be sucked in through this mesh and through the filter, and therefore it improves the air quality of the room while we are using the saws. This has come definitely handy when we have been sawing a lot or resawing a lot of 2x4 on the table saw, and it has been pretty dusty in here. The two handles spin around and are for knocking. They have two paddles attached to them, and they knock the sawdust that is on the filter off of it. As we walk over here to the chop saw, you will see there isn't actually a hose connected to the chop saw. The way dust collection for the chop saw works is that the sawdust hits the back wall. You can see where it's yellow against that wall there, and then falls into this black trough. The trough has a hose attached to it, which then runs down to the pipe that hits over to the dust collector. Now we're going to wander over to the air compressor. Our air compressor is a 60-gallon Ingersoll Rand and is fantastic. The tank is the cream-colored cylinder, and then there is a motor driven by a belt on the top that actually compresses the air. The air compressor runs all of our pneumatic tools here in the shop, which are our staple gun, nail gun, brad nailer. There are other tools that you can get, like impact wrenches and sprayers, but we don't have any of those yet. Attached to the air compressor is this gray valve over here. This gray valve is used for regulating the pressure of the air that comes out of the tank. The way the air compressor works is that as the motor runs and it builds up pressure, it only builds the pressure in the tank to one specified pressure. Our pneumatic tools that we use here in the shop all tend to want to be run at different pressures, and also, depending on what we're using them for, the amount of wood that we're trying to shoot through will also tell us what pressure we want to run the tool at. This regulator also collects water from the tank. As you compress air, it squeezes the water out of it. This can get into the tools, and it can also sit inside the tank of the air compressor and rust, which creates weak spots in the tank. We've added this regulator and water remover, which helps prolong the life of the compressor and of our tools. One of the projects that I worked on here in the shop was to get all of our air hoses that were run on the floor, and now I've run them up to the ceiling, and then they run across our ceiling, back over to where our work tables are, to these two blue reels that are hung from the ceiling. These reels are fantastic. What it means is that now we don't have any air hoses that run along the floor. We're able to keep the air lines up in the air and retracted until we need them, and then we can come over to the airline and we're able to pull the air hose down when we need it. Once we're done with it, we just let it roll back up and it's out of the way. Safety is of the utmost importance here in the scene shop. Not only do we have a first aid kit above the flammables cabinet and also above our breaker panel by the door to the stage, we also have above the flammables cabinet our binder that contains all of our safety data sheets for all the chemicals and products that we have in the scene shop. This is an example of one of the chemicals that we have in the shop. It is an argon oxygen mix for welding. It's stored in a tank with a cap. This is the safety data sheet for gas mixture argon balance 1 to 5% oxygen. The safety data sheets are set up the same for every product that a safety data sheet is pulled for. They're divided into sections, and I will now go through what those sections illustrate. Section 1 is the product and company identification. This lets you know who made the product, how to get in contact with them, and an emergency number. Section 2 is hazard identification. This is a page that tells you, or a section that tells you what the product is and what the hazards are that are associated with it. This tells you that it's a gas under pressure, and it tells you what not to do. Do not handle until all safety precautions have been read and understood. The next section is other hazards. This page tells us what the product is composed of, composition information on ingredients. So this tells us that it is argon and oxygen and their relative percentages. The next section tells you what the first aid measures are for coming in contact with this product. Section 5 is for firefighting measures. Section 6 is for accidental release measures. Back to the other page. On this page, tells you how to handle and how to store the product. Section 8 tells us about exposure controls and personal protection. This essentially is what to do when you are exposed to it and what you should wear when you are using it. Section 9 tells us what its physical and chemical properties are. This tells us that its physical state is a gas, that it has no color, that it has no odor, its pH doesn't matter, there's no information on its relative evaporation rate, so this tells us all of its chemical properties. Section 10 tells us about its stability and its reactivity. This gas has no reactivity and is stable. Section 11 tells us about its toxicological information. This is how the product is going to harm you if you come into contact with it. It has no acute toxicity. It has no skin corrosion irritation. It has no serious eye damage or irritation. No respiratory or skin sensitization. No reproductive toxicity. So this is a fairly benign product. Section 12 goes into ecological information. Section 13 tells us how we should dispose of this product. Section 14 tells us how we should transport this product. Section 15 tells us about regulatory information, including federal regulations. And then finally, Section 16 gives us any other pertinent information about the product. This little diamond here with the colored squares inside of it and numbers tells us that it is a fairly benign and harmless product. It has no health hazard. It has no flammability hazard. As I said earlier, we have a safety data sheet for every product that we have in the shop. I've just flipped randomly into the middle of the binder here, and we have a safety data sheet for, this is Minwax Wood Finish Dark Walnut. This is going to be organized exactly the same as the safety data sheet was for the oxygen-argon welding gas mixture. The reason that these safety data sheets are organized the same and exist is so that anybody who works or comes into the shop and is in contact with any of these materials, whether on purpose or accidentally, this binder is here for quick and easy access to the information that will help you determine the best procedure to deal with contact with the substance. And the best procedure may be just to wash your hands. Most of the products that we have here are very benign and won't hurt you at all.